Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Got question Chase, has got the facts, talking NFL numbers, he's got your back. A little chart trend ball, man, he's got it like that. Chasing data by do champions. Chasing data applies to everyone. Chasing data, yeah, we're live today. Chasing data for always. Chasing data by do champions.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Chasing Data. We are fully into off-season mode at this point. And what would be this week's episode without jumping into everyone's free agency moves? Nothing too crazy this year. We hadn't seen anything completely unheard of, but I did take the time to rank all 32 teams. We're going to start with the worst one and work our way all the way up to the top one, in my opinion. Now, this isn't who's the best teams, who's the worst teams. It's who's done the most to get better since the end of the 2024 season. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and hear from our sponsors, and then we'll get started.
For the best Italian food in Western New York, Elliott Apollo's, call 716-825-3675. The Lardon Construction Group.
Fubo TV, the official streaming service of Do Champions. FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Do Champions.
For all your summertime needs, beauty pools, as well as kayak pools.
CX Chronicles, your total customer solutions focused manager. W.GG, the official energy drink of Do Champions.
Hey, Sons of Erie, our artwork looks better on your walls. Hamburg Brewing, please visit our tap room on Boston State Road, Hamburg, New York. And finally,
Fat Boy Surf Club for all your surfing needs.
So, like I said, we're going to start at the very bottom, and I will talk about their main moves of every team that they've made, who they've lost of relevance, and who they've added over the last few days in free agency. So, to get that started, let's switch this over here. And we are going to start with team number 32, who is the Los Angeles Chargers. So, in my opinion, they have done the least to improve their team since the season has ended. Their key additions, Najee Harris, they signed him to that 1 year, $5 million. I'm going to give rough estimates on their contracts, but 1 year, $5 million deal. That ranks as, on average, going into 2025, the 20th highest paid running back. He has given you 1,000 yards every year. You're bringing him into the Greg Roman offense. So he's probably going to get ran into the ground. They let Gus Edwards go. They lost J.K. Dobbins in free agency. Najee has given you, given the Steelers 1,000 yards all 4 seasons that he's been in the NFL. So I'm curious to see what he's going to do with Greg Roman. He's probably going to be he's probably going to be the workhorse. I wouldn't say this prevents them from still taking a first-round running back. Do they still take Omarion Hampton? I think they're picked 20-ish, maybe 20. And they could still easily go running back in the first round. I mean, there's still going to be a lot of talent. I don't think Ashton Genty falls to them. Greg Roman's the offensive coordinator, so this is going to be a run-first offense, obviously. But let's talk about their other addition first. They did get Khalil Mack back. He was expected by some people to be getting upwards of a 3-year contract. He will be 34 years old whenever the season starts, so he is definitely increasing in age for sure. Last year he had 6 sacks, but the year before he had 17, I believe. He still had a ton of pressures last year. He's still showing that he can get in the backfield, get to the quarterback. So them bringing him back on a 1 year, $18 million deal is great in my opinion. Like, that's one of the top moves out of anybody in the NFL for the offseason. But with that said, that's about all they did. They did not. I expected the Chargers to go into this offseason with the mindset of, let's get Justin Herbert some more weapons besides Ladd McConkey. Justin Herbert is throwing. Quentin Johnston did take that small next step this season, but he has not shown that he was going to be that first-round pick that they made 2 years ago. So with that said, I expected them to do more. They did also lose, like I said, J.K. Dobbins, Asante Samuel, Hayden Hurst. They also lost him as well. They cut Gus Edwards and saved $3 million, and then they also cut Joey Bosa on the defensive side of the ball, which is saving them $25 million. So all in all, they've lost a good bit of talent, even though Joey Bosa was expensive. That was probably worth happening. But they haven't done anything to add to this team to improve them. I mean, you look at the Broncos, who we'll get to in a little bit, but they're way ahead of them on this ranking because they have not hit the brakes at all. They have put their foot on the gas, and they are steadily trying to improve. Raiders as well. Raiders are taking a big swing with Geno Smith, but the Chargers are just still sitting back, just seeing who Justin Herbert's going to throw to. They still needed to improve that offensive line, the interior. They did re-sign Bradley Bozeman, but nothing else has been done, and I'm curious to see what they do next steps in order to give Justin Herbert a chance. I don't know. Now they've lost out on everybody. I was hoping they would get Chris Godwin, maybe go after T. Higgins somehow. I don't know. But they have not done enough for me to rank them anywhere higher but dead last. So, moving on. 31. San Francisco 49ers. This team, I have just the word yes. They have had an offseason. What have they done? They added a tight end, 3 years, $20 million. Nothing to write home about. They cut Leonard Floyd, who had, I believe, 9.5 sacks last year. They traded away Deebo Samuel, which was expected. Deebo, he had a down year for sure in 2024. He's definitely getting to where he has those running back miles on him. He's going into his fifth season, and he's definitely on the decline for sure. But that's the list of their key moves. They've not done anything to really improve this team. They haven't added any big time free agents. They've just I feel like they're taking a step back based on their Super Bowl pushes of years past. And maybe that's the best thing, because they also are trying to work on that contract extension for Brock Purdy, because it does seem like they are going to extend him, and he's going to be the quarterback of the future. There are now rumors of Brandon Ayuk possibly on the move. I don't know how real that is or how true, believable that is. But I'm curious to see what else they can do, because they've done nothing to really improve this team other than get rid of Deebo, which, that saved some money for them, but that's it. I have nothing on this image because they've done nothing of note to get any better. So they're 31st. Quick and easy for them. 30th, Dallas Cowboys. They have added one player of note, Osa Odigizua, who was already on their team. They tagged him, I believe, at first, and then they went ahead and extended him, giving him a 4-year, $80 million contract, which is a little rich for some people's taste, or some people's blood, I would say. 27 years old going into this season. He was, it's still not, it's $20 million a year on average, which would rank 38th going into 2025. Last year, he did have certain areas that he stood out in. He was 3rd in quarterback pressures, 5th in hurries. Still, a good bit of money to commit to this guy. I believe they're banking on the fact that he is going to get better as time goes on. They still need to pay Michael Parsons. They just recently paid Dak Prescott. They did restructure Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb to create more room for these types of moves. They extended him. They added Javonte Williams. But on the counter of adding Javonte Williams, they lost Zach Martin. They lost Rico Dowdle, who came on very strong at the end of that season. We'll talk more about him and where he went as we continue on in this episode. They also lost Eric Kendrick. So they lost 3 contributors on this team for sure. Added Javonte Williams, which I'm curious to see what he can do. Last year he had the chance to, beat everybody out in Denver, and they ended up being a running back by committee. No one ever took the reins of that offense of the backfield. So he gets a 1-year, $3 million prove-it deal. I mean, there's not much more to that. People talked about Saquon like resetting the market and improving the value of the running back after they took a dive a few years ago. And Saquon gets big money, but no one else really is. Like I said, Javonte got that 1-year, $3 million contract. They did re-sign 2 free agents, Marquise Bell, 3 years, $9 million, cheap deal, and Cavante Turpin, the speedy return man who can get the ball. You see him get a lot of screens. I say a lot, but he does get screens. That's how he contributes on the offensive side of the ball. But other than that, they have not done anything besides sign second-tier, third-tier free agents. Nothing big going on in Dallas yet. The rest of the NFC may be passing them up. We'll see what happens. Moving along, 29th is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you see here Patrick McCarry and De'Ami Brown, which we'll talk more about. The reason they're still ranked so low is, they got rid of Christian Kirk. They traded him away. The new GM who comes in, who looks like he's 25 years old or so, he comes in and he is making big time moves and he is revamping this offense. Him and Liam Cohen, the new coach that came from Tampa Bay, the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. It looks like they're trying to mold this offense in their image. So they get rid of Evan Ingram, who had a down year last year, but was productive the year before for sure. They save $6 million on his contract, and then they also cut Josh Reynolds, who was a non-factor, saved $4 million on his. So that's who they cut. And like I said, they traded Christian Kirk. They get a 7th rounder out of it. They were just trying to get rid of the money with him. They're not really getting it. They got a 7th rounder. They just traded him. If they traded him within the division, that shows how little they thought of him. They traded him to the Texans. They did add a few people, no one really big name. The biggest one to me is Patrick McCarry, who is basically a Swiss Army knife on that offensive line. You can move him around. He played in Baltimore the last few years, and he kind of fills in wherever you need him to. So he gets a 3-year, $38 million deal, which is ranked 19th on average value going into 2025. They signed Jordan Lewis, the defensive back, 3-year, $30 million. And then they also signed De'Ami Brown, who is kind of on a prove-it contract. I mean, he had his best year in that Cliff Kingsbury offense in Washington last year. He kind of showed that he could do more once he had the ball. They kind of set him up for more screens, more versatility for sure, based compared to years past. But that's also the quarterback that he was playing with. Last year was his best year, not outstanding numbers, but 30 receptions, 300 yards, and a touchdown, which was a career year. But outside of that, that's all the Jags have done. Nothing earth-shattering for sure, and that's why they are 29th. And leave the list up for a second, and we will let you look at that and take some order. So we have number 28, who is Miami. Miami's not really in the best position to make a lot of moves. Kind of is still up in the air as to what their left tackle situation is going to be with Teron Armstead. It kind of makes you wonder where they're going into the season. I mean, I feel like this season is going to be a real make or break for Tua and this offense and Mike McDaniel. Because if they miss the playoffs again, he's definitely going to be on a hot seat. I know Tua was injured last year, and they just did miss the playoffs, but they continue to beat up on the low-level teams and cannot beat the above 500 teams. And if you're going to be good, you have to be able to beat everyone, obviously. So the one player of note that they've added is James Daniels. He was injured last year, but had a relatively good year in Pittsburgh the year before. I think he may have played a few weeks last year. He ruptured his Achilles, but they're saying he's going to be available for the start of the season, or that's what is expected. And you look who they lost. The key player they lost for me is Calais Campbell. He is getting up in age, but he is still such a huge contributor on any defense that he becomes a part of. He stays healthy, even though he's up in age. He's a leader in the locker room. Last year, he had 52 tackles, 3 sacks, 25 quarterback pressures. They let him walk in free agency. I mean, I guess he still could come back, but I feel like he's wanting to sign. There was the rumbles last year that he was signing to a contender or wanting to go to a contender. Never happened. They cut Raheem Mostert, saved $3 million. And Raheem Mostert, they're definitely leaning into Devin Achane as the feature back in Miami, because just 2 years ago, Raheem Mostert, even though I believe he's 31 years old, he had 23 rushing touchdowns and I believe over 1,000 yards on the ground, but they are full-fledged Devin Achane going into 2025. Cut Kendall Fuller, also saved $3 million. So outside of James Daniels, the only players of note that they've added is Tyrell Dotson. They re-signed him, bring him back, the linebacker, 2-year, $8 million contract. He's good in coverage, but that's about it as a linebacker. So moving on, we have the Tennessee Titans. Again, I mean, a lot of these teams, so the bottom 6 teams, none of them, well, the Chargers made the playoffs. They're the only ones out of this group from last year that made the playoffs, and they are the worst, but they have not done anything yet. I just really am unsure what they're doing. But Tennessee Titans, moving on, 27, Tennessee Titans. Free agency players that walk, they really don't have a lot of talent on this team. I've covered them in detail. I had them ranked as the worst team going into 2025 as of about 2 weeks ago. I don't think much has changed. They lost Quandre Diggs. That's the only player of note in free agency that they've lost. They did cut Harold Landry since I've done that episode, but I mean, that just makes them worse. It doesn't really help improve their roster for sure. They saved $11 million on him by cutting him. They look like they may be in full rebuild mode. It's still to be determined what they're going to do with that number 1 pick. Are they taking Cam Ward? Are they trading back a few picks, maybe with New York? Not really sure what the plan is in Tennessee. Again, they are my other team that has, yes, they have had an offseason. They haven't done much with it. They signed the linebacker Cody Barton, 3-year, $21 million contract. Again, nothing to write home about. I mean, I'm listing him because he gave him a little more money. Not big enough to put him on this graphic here to show that he was a key addition for the Titans. They also added Xavier Woods, 2-year contract, $10 million, cheap, on the older side of playing in the NFL. Good thing about him is he is dependable. He played every snap in Carolina at least last year, maybe the last 2 years. So he's going to be on the field if you're signing him. Not much more to say about the Titans. Good luck to them in 2025. Moving on to 26. Also notice 2 of the bottom 6 teams are in the AFC South. Not ideal for those 2. The Jets, who have made good moves, but when I look at it as the net positive or the net score for them as if they've improved their roster or not. They did cut Aaron Rodgers, which I think was a necessity, but obviously you can argue that he is definitely on the downslope of his career, but at worst, he's a top 20 quarterback, but they did lose him because they cut him to move on in Aaron Glenn's regime. And they also cut Devontae Adams. They saved $30 million in cap space this year. With Devontae being gone, it's just a complete rebuild. So losing those 2 talents definitely knocks them down a few notches on this ranking for sure. But they did add a few players. They re-signed Jamian Sherwood, who was their linebacker, who definitely has stepped up over the last few seasons. He played alongside C.J. Mosley, but C.J. Mosley was injured last year. And even though this team was terrible last year, he's a solid all-around player, especially at that linebacker position. And for him to be playing as well as he did on a team that was as bad as they were, it speaks to his value to this team. They give him a 3-year, $45 million contract, which is 5th on average going into 2025. I mean, I believe he's worth it, though, especially at that linebacker position. They made a few other signings. They signed Andre Cisco to put its safety position just on a 1-year, $10 million contract. A little pricey, but see what happens with that. These are players that Aaron Glenn, he has an eye for probably key defenders that he wants. And I'm curious to see what he does with these players, because the other one of note that he signed, and me being a Ravens fan, he signed Brandon Stevens. to a three, not he specifically, but the team, the franchise signed Brandon Stevens to a 3-year, $36 million contract, which going into 2025, which is, the first year of that contract, but still 20th on average value. When I tell you he was not fun to watch as a Ravens fan, there were much, I don't know if there was much worse things to see than him being in coverage. He had the second worst coverage EPA in the NFL. So his expected points added, he was around negative 25, I believe. So over the season, he gave up 25 points net. That was his net number as he gave up. He was minus 25. And them giving him a 3-year, $36 million contract, questionable to say the least. The other one is Justin Fields. They give him a 2-year, $40 million contract and it's $30 million guaranteed. So it's basically a 1-year prove-it deal at $30 million. I'm really curious to see how this works out because they bring the passing game coordinator from Detroit over to New York, follows Aaron Glenn. They definitely did not run a option type offense in Detroit. Jared Goff never even considers running the ball or even has the threat of running the ball. Whereas Justin Fields is the complete opposite in that with that scheme. I think this is going to be very interesting. I feel like, $30 million, whatever. It's 1 year. If they're going to take a shot, at least they are cognizant enough to realize that they are in a rebuild. They did not go out and spend money on 3 or 4 years of Sam Darnold, make a big splash. I feel like they realize they're a year away still from this rebuild that they're taking part of. And with them taking Justin Fields, it's like a big swing basically on a 1-year contract. If it works, hey, great. We saw the Bills a few years ago with Tyrod Taylor. They snuck into the playoffs it's almost like the same type of scenario to me. Build the team around. They have other parts around him. But the key thing that I'm excited about to see what he can do with this offense. Last year, Aaron Rodgers didn't fit this offense because he's so immobile that there was no threat of really like play action. There's no him handing the ball off. He was not going to trick anybody, especially with his feet. Justin Fields, you have Breece Hall, who was underutilized last year, Braylon Allen, who was underutilized last year in this offense, is definitely going to open this up. And Justin Fields played relatively well. You consider where he was at a year ago with the Chicago Bears, where no one wanted him. Pittsburgh gave up a 6th-round pick, I believe, for him. And now he's getting a 2-year 40, but a 1-year $30 million guaranteed contract. It's crazy how much things change in 1 year, but he went to Pittsburgh in an offense that really wasn't well suited for him either necessarily. I don't know if Arthur Smith has an offense suited for anyone in today's NFL, but I'm curious to see what he can do this year in this offense. They are a sneaky team with the defense that they have. I feel like the defense underperformed last year basically because every game was a blowout. It was a losing effort for sure. So I'm really curious to see what Justin Fields does this year with the Jets. Like I said, they could be a really sneaky team to be around 500, have a chance at the playoffs, in my opinion. One of the most more intriguing storylines for 2025 for me. So, continuing on, we have number 25, the Houston Texans. Man, the AFC South, they are struggling in the offseason. They have not done much at all. They have made some questionable moves, to say the least. They trade away Laramie Tunsil, which we will revisit again in a little bit because he goes to the Commanders. He's by far, let me just preface by saying they have definitely revamped or trying to revamp that offensive line, which was the worst by any team that made the playoffs. They gave up the most sacks by any team making the playoffs. I think it was in the 30s or so that they gave up. So they trade away their best offensive lineman, left tackle Laramie Tunsil. He did struggle with penalties last year, but they move on from him. Maybe they thought He's going to be wanting a new contract in the next year or so, and they're trying to get ahead of that. They don't want to. They know that they have to pay Will Anderson coming up. They have to pay C.J. Stroud. They have to pay Derek Stingley Jr. Maybe they're trying to get ahead of the curve here, or ahead of what's to come, and try to hit big in the draft, accumulate draft picks. I mean, honestly, they can't be much worse with this offensive line. It was terrible. We all know that. So they get rid of Laramie Tunsil. They get rid of Kenyon Green. He goes to the Eagles in a trade. They cut Shaq Mason. Again, terrible offensive line. So they are, I mean, in my opinion, it can't get much worse. So whatever, part ways with them. So in that Kenyon Green trade, they add more to the defense. The defense was outstanding already, top 5 easily, top 3 potentially last year, and they add to it by bringing in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from the Eagles. They traded Kenyon Green and a 5th round pick, which was not that much. I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's contract is 22nd on average going into 2025. He had 6 interceptions last year. He gave up a minus 10% catch rate over expected. So, I mean, he's great. He's a great player. He kind of fits that hard-nosed swarm mindset that DeMeco Ryans is trying to implement in Houston. So that's an interesting addition for sure. That back 7 is, I mean, the defense all around is ridiculous. They have Lassiter, Derek Stingley Jr., Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They lose Jeff Okudah, but whatever. Who else? Jalen Petrie. I mean, this back 7. Then they have Will Anderson up front with Daniil Hunter. It's just everywhere. They're stacked everywhere. It's ridiculous. They also added Sheldon Rankins, who was let go by the Bengals on a 1-year, $5 million contract, shore up that defensive line on the interior. And like I said earlier, they did add Christian Kirk for a 7th round pick. To me, is it possible they try to restructure that contract? I believe it's going to cost $16 million this year. He played only 7 games last year before getting injured. He had 27 receptions, 379 yards, 1 touchdown. The year before, he was much better in that offense with Trevor Lawrence. I think he kind of helps out what they need on this team. They definitely, Nico is the end breaker. Christian Kirk can be a deep threat, especially from that slot position. He's sneakily fast if he can stay healthy. I honestly think he could bounce back. I mean, a 7th round pick to try to capitalize on this C.J. Stroud rookie contract, worth a shot. That is, if they're going the route that they are going, where they're trying something totally new with this offensive line. But again, that's why they're 25th. Nothing big, some potentially questionable moves with this offensive line, because as of right now, they've lost talent. Not the best talent, but they've lost talent for sure. Did add CGJ. See what happens. And forgot to show their pictures, but obviously there's Christian Kirk and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Moving on, this team is ranked 24th, but I honestly think they could be lower the more I think about it. The New Orleans Saints. Last week, my show was about the New Orleans Saints and the cap issues that they are faced with. And boy, did they pull some magic, the rabbit out of the hat with the magic that they have tried to pull over the last week. If you go online and look at their transactions, they're like, compared to the other team, it's like restructure, 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 restructure. Again, very questionable moves by Mickey Loomis and everyone in New Orleans. I don't know what they're doing, but they still kept talent. I'm trying to look at the glass half full for this team, and at best, they've had the 24th best offseason thus far. I don't know. So, to talk about what they've done, they cut Jamal Williams a week or two ago, saved the $1.5 million, nothing big. They lost Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who I kind of wanted them to keep because he definitely was a deep ball threat for them. And the second half of the season with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, he did relatively well, in my opinion. I mean, they have no other weapons really on that team, so he was drawing sometimes best defenders. He had 19 catches, 411 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's a 21.6 yards per catch rate. If he qualified, if he would have played enough snaps to qualify with everyone in the NFL, that 21.6 yards per catch would have ranked second in the NFL. Like I said, big play threat. Saints let him go. Saints do some crazy things sometimes. They re-signed again. They brought back talent. They kept talent. They restructured talent. So that's why they're 24th on this, because they did keep the talent, even though it may not be the best move for them going forward. They paid Juwan Johnson 3 years, $31 million. Why? I have no idea. He had the best year of his career with 580 yards or so. I don't know what they expect out of him. 3 years, $31 million. That's the 11th highest tight end contract going into 2025. Is he number 11 in the NFL? Absolutely not. Not really sure. They re-signed Chase Young on a 3-year, $51 million contract. 20th amongst the edge players. If you're into PFF grades, he was ranked 52nd last year. So you're paying him 20th in value, ranked 52nd. He's even worse against the run. The only thing his pros are in the pass rush, but he gets QB hits, not sacks. So it's almost like he gets there but doesn't finish all the time. Paying him 3 years, $51 million is quite pricey whenever he definitely had single-digit sacks last year. 3 years, $51 million. That's $17 million a year. The Chargers signed one of the best DNs in the NFL in Khalil Mack last year to a 1-year deal for $18 million. Those two are in two different tiers for me. Or maybe there's definitely a big gap in between them for sure. So, I don't know. Saints continue to be questionable. They restructured Derek Carr. Like I said, they restructured a lot of players. They restructured Derek Carr. They commit to him. What in the world they're doing, I don't know. Trying to look at the glass half full. In those 10 games he played last year, that was the only games that they had wins in. They were 5-5, and they were 0-7 when he didn't start. So maybe he can do something for him. But again, they kept the talent, but I feel like they should have moved on from him. My question is, what has Kellen Moore done in this regime? Like, there's no imprint of Kellen Moore to this team. They brought back everybody they already had. I did have some hope that for the Saints fans that with Kellen Moore coming in, they were going to allow him to reset and do what he would like to do with this offense. Nothing has shown that to me. Nothing at all. They're bringing back same players on offense. They haven't done anything. They did trade for a player from New England, get a defensive tackle for a 7th-round pick. He's a run stopper. Nothing crazy. Signed Justin Reed the other day. They restructured Tyrann Mathieu. All these players that were potential cut candidates that I talked about, they kept. They kept Tyrann Mathieu. They kept Derek Carr. They kept Cam Jordan, who said he's coming back, which is probably a detriment to the team. Yeah, maybe he's a locker room leader. But with that said, what is it worth what you're paying him for his production on the field? Because his production on the field is not the greatest. I'm going to remember to put these pictures up as I go. But back to Justin Reed. They did sign him. Again, that's bringing in talent, but is it wisely spending money? We talked about the pass protection in the last week's episode. I don't know. I just don't know what their end goal is. Again, they're playing in the NFC South. Best case scenario, they win the NFC South and they lose first round of the playoffs. So I don't really understand what the purpose of all this is. I really don't get it. Moving on. Enough about the Saints. They suck, and they continue probably to suck going into 2025. Detroit Lions. The team that was expected to make it to the NFC Championship for sure and potentially go to the Super Bowl. But they didn't do a lot this offseason. They lost their offensive coordinator. They lost their defensive coordinator, which I really didn't weigh into these free agency rankings, but that definitely is a negative for sure. They lost Carlton Davis, who got injured, their cornerback last year, CB1 for sure. Terrion Arnold was their rookie last year, but he was not CB1. So they lose him. They lose, well, momentarily. You could move them up a spot or two since I did these rankings, because they did end up adding back Levi Onwuzurike, who, out of the free agent defensive tackles, he ranks second in pressure rate at 9.7%. So definitely a big player to bring back for this team. The problem with him is health. He's had issues the last 2 years, so they bring him back. I think he was on a 1-year deal. If he can stay healthy along with everybody else on this defensive side of the ball, then they could do something more, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. They also cut Zadarius Smith, who was a good pass rusher for them. He was ranked 30th in PFF for the 2024 season, saved $6 million. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't worth keeping him around. I don't know what they were planning on there. But the only player of note that they brought back, they also lost their guard, Kevin Zeitler, who went to Tennessee. Again, should have brought him probably back for another 1-year contract if possible. But they bring in DJ Reed, who was ranked, I believe, by PFF as the top free agent cornerback. Whether or not you agree with that, well, whatever. They bring him on a 3-year, $48 million contract, which is ranked 18th on average value. Again, I don't know why PFF had him ranked number 1. I mean, at least I guess it's a net positive by getting rid or letting Carlton Davis walk, who signed with the Patriots, and bringing in DJ Reed. DJ Reed definitely still held his own on his side of the field in New York last few years. But Detroit hasn't done a lot. Do they really need to? Not necessarily. They just need the coin flips of health to go their way more in 2025 versus 2024. That's the difference. I mean, if their defense is healthy for the season, they could be a totally different team going into 2025. Moving on, Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, do they really, same thing as the Detroit Lions, do they really need to do anything to improve? Not necessarily. They just won the Super Bowl and won it easily, handily. Not a real close game, as we all know, versus the Kansas City Chiefs. They've made quite a few transactions. They lost Kenneth Gainwell in free agency. They traded away Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, like we spoke on earlier. So they lose him in the secondary. Still have Reed Blankenship, and the two rookie cornerbacks in Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell, who were outstanding to say the least. They let go of their aging cornerbacks, which was necessary, being that they have such studs and those young players who are on rookie contracts. So they cut Darius Slay, cut James Bradbury. I think they're both going to be post-June 1st releases to save them more money. The only person that they've technically added, Kenyon Green, in that trade, how much is he even going to see the field? I mean, I'm curious to see what that offensive line coach Stoutland can do to improve him. If anybody can do it, it's him. They re-signed Zach Bond, who was a major loss in free agency. He was on that 1-year, $3.5 million contract all over the field for Philadelphia after he left New Orleans year before last and became an amazing player, all-pro player. He was a priority for them in free agency. Was he potentially the best linebacker in football last year? Arguably so. They give him a 3-year, $51 million contract, which ranks 4th in average value. And to me, that's well worth it if he can continue to contribute the way he did last year. They extend Saquon Barkley. I spoke on this earlier. He continues to be worth the money. Honestly, the way they work this contract is they say it's a 2-year, $41 million contract. But what they did was they took the potential incentive money or roster bonuses and everything like that. They guaranteed it. They turned it basically all into guarantees. Highest paid running back now, instead of being around 4th, 5th, I believe is what he was. Now he's the highest. So, confirm those two players, two of your best players, and move on in the offseason. I'm sure they'll draft well. They always do. Continue to shore up both sides of the ball. They did also lose Milton Williams, but they have so many players on that defensive front. They'll be all right, to say the least. 21, Cleveland Browns. I'm sure some people are surprised to see that they are 21st. They lost Jameis. There's not like a ton of talent to lose. They had the possibility of losing someone very big, but they did not. But they only lose Jameis Winston and Elijah Moore of note. They keep their main focus, Myles Garrett. They extended him. We all know what happened with him. They went into the offseason and Myles Garrett was saying that he was tired of being in an environment that was not close to winning a Super Bowl, and they are not close. Obviously, they're in that Deshaun Watson contract that they still have to work through. They restructure it yet again. He has so much guaranteed money, $300+ million. Myles Garrett doubles down, says he wants out. Andrew Berry says we're not trading him. It's kind of a stalemate. Who's going to budge first? We all do our mock trades of where we think he may end up. He signs a 4-year, $160 million extension. So it's just all talk, I guess. Money talks and championships walk. Good news for him. I mean, obviously, he is a key player and a very net positive to continue to have on your team. 14+ sacks in 4 straight seasons. I believe he's the first player to ever do that. So he's consistent. He's amazing every year. And he's great. End of story. Everybody knows how good he is. They re-signed Devin Bush, which a lot of people probably say, oh, Devin Bush, who cares? 1 year, $3 million contract. The crazy thing is Devin Bush played by far the best ball in Cleveland in those few games that he played, which was great because what's going on with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, JOK, their young, great linebacker who got injured last year. We still are unsure what his future is going to be in the NFL with that neck injury that he had. So them re-signing him is great for Cleveland, especially in the middle of that defense. And then they make the trade. If I'm pretending to be a Cleveland Browns fan, I sit and I pray every night that they are not trading for Kenny Pickett in plans of him being the day one starting quarterback. If that's what they're doing, I'm hoping that they're saying, oh, he's going to be the backup for whoever else we bring in. Obviously, the quarterback factory in Philadelphia thought more of Tanner McKee than they did of Kenny Pickett because they move on from Kenny Pickett. They just take DTR, who was god-awful. We all know about his average target of depth, one of the worst seasons in NFL history as far as throwing the ball. Everything's at the line of scrimmage. But they trade DTR in a 5th to get Kenny Pickett. To be determined on what they're going to do with him, kind of questionable. That's their offseason. I mean, they didn't really lose much, but they keep Myles Garrett, which is a positive for them for sure. Continuing on. Number 20. Number 20, Green Bay Packers. Again, another team who has not really done a ton. There was speculation that they may be in the DK Metcalf sweepstakes. They were talking about sending a first and one of their second-tier wide receivers. You know, they have all these wide receivers that are not alphas. They're all wide receiver 2s. So, I mean, I guess that was all speculative because Pittsburgh offered less and ended up with DK Metcalf. Anyways, the only player of note, they lost A.J. Dillon. Jair Alexander was going to be curious to see what happens with him. But they add Aaron Banks. Most people, if you're not an in-depth, in-the-know football fan, he's a guard from San Francisco. Not a household name for sure. They give him 4 years, $77 million. There was not a lot of choices in the offensive line market this year. Was not the strongest of markets. 6th in value or average money going in 2025. So we'll see what that does for their offensive line. They also bring in Nate Hobbs from Las Vegas, almost said Oakland, on a 4-year, $48 million contract, which ranks 20th. He played just 7 games last year, but he did allow just a 73 passer rating. So there is some potential there, especially with the unknown of what's going on with Jair Alexander. That's it. The Packers have not been very active. curious to see what they do. They still need that wide receiver one, I feel. They have all these, like I said, all these wide receiver twos. Christian Watson tore his ACL at the end of the season, so he's not going to be back anytime soon, I don't believe. And they have Romeo Dobbs, who stays with concussions. Jaden Reed is on the smaller side as a wide receiver. They don't have anyone that's a go-getter. I mean, I would love to see. Devontae Adams coming back there would have been great, but here we are. He's not there. Moving on. Number 19, New York Giants. For a team that is ranked, I believe, by me as 30th overall, they are in the top 20 as far as what they're doing with their offseason. They lose the likes of Adoree Jackson, who I wish they could have kept somehow on a cheaper contract. He ends up going to a division rival in Philadelphia. They signed him earlier. They could have kept him. The Isaiah Simmons project didn't work out. He walks in free agency. They also, as of now, have lost Azeez Ojulari, who I feel like didn't get as much playing time because of where he was in this defensive line. They have the likes of Dexter Lawrence. They have the likes of Brian Burns. They have Kayvon Thibodeau. I mean, they're not going to push Azeez into a defensive tackle role. So he really didn't do much. He's had the injuries. He is only 25 years old, and he's had 23 sacks in 46 games. That's a sack every other game. I mean, that's decent. I mean, on a 17-game schedule, if he could play 17 games, you're getting around 9 sacks a season. That's ideal for sure, but he can't stay on the field, so he walks. Players that they get. They re-signed Darius Slayton. It seems like every time that, Giants fans, Giants media start talking about, oh, Darius Slayton, he's no good. He needs to go. He is good with the deep ball. I mean, that is his go-to thing as a wide receiver. They bring him back yet again. They go out there and see the wide receiver market and say, well, I guess we got to bring him back because there's nothing really better that we could convince to come here. Darius Slayton gets that 3-year, $36 million contract. Last year, he had almost 40 receptions, almost 600 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like I said, deep ball threat, 16th in yards per catch at 14.7. It's kind of hard to grade this move for Darius Slayton whenever we still don't know who the quarterback is going to be, because as of right now, is it Tommy DeVito? Is that all who's in I think they signed someone else today, not relevant person, to be in that locker room. So basically, it's going to come down to if they draft Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, maybe Jackson Dart. I think they're taking one of those 3. Aaron Rodgers has been linked to him. Russell Wilson has been linked to him. One more that I'm missing here. So one of those 3. So, I mean, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers very likely could be their quarterback starting week 1. See what happens with Darius Slayton. So, players pictured here. One of my top targets as far as value was Paulson Adebo, who they got from New Orleans. New Orleans can't afford to do anything. So they get him on a 3-year, $54 million contract, 13th in average, so a little bit higher than probably what people expected. And my thing, you look at the advanced analytics, where it stands out for me for Paulson Adebo, he was 4th in coverage EPA last year, which is way higher than what I thought. I thought he was a solid player as a cornerback. He's coming into this team, and he's going to be CB1 from day one on this team, which whenever I did my Giants episode, when I had them ranked 30 3 weeks ago now, I wanted them to go after Paulson Adebo because, like I said, I wanted him to be, he could easily be CB1, and now that's where he's at as of right now. He had, like I said, number 4 in coverage EPA, so that's expected points added, minus 25.6. So he took away points like crazy. On the other end, Brandon Stevens, was the opposite end. He was 40 points difference or so from that. Anyways, so Paulson Adebo gets in there. We also have Javon Holland, who had a down year this year compared to where he was at in 2023 in Miami, but he's still worth it. Did they overpay for him? Yeah, possibly. 3-year, $45 million to bring in the safety, which is 9th in average money. So like I said, maybe they overpaid, but the Giants kind of have to bring in talent. They are on the bottom end of the league for sure, having a number 3 pick. So if you can get possible top tier talent in, you pay a few extra dollars to bring them in and see what they can do. Moving on. 18. In AFC, Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh cuts Preston Smith a few weeks ago. They saved $13 million. They get him from Green Bay, who did not produce in the slightest in Pittsburgh. Larry Ogunjobi, who was a household name for some a few years ago on that defensive interior, cut him, saved $7 million. Moving some of these players out, they lose Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, like we spoke on earlier, who's in New York. Russell Wilson, are they going to bring him back? I have no idea. But Russell Wilson, who visited the Browns, I don't know what's going on, and he also visited the Giants. He's gone. Who do they add? Old man Darius Slay. Does he have anything left in him? I think he got him 1 year, $10 million, something like that. So he will be on the team. I think like I said, he's going to be a post June 1st cut or release by the Eagles. So he will be there. But the big move was DK Metcalf. Seattle has not been ranked yet. I will get to my thoughts on them, but they part with DK Metcalf. Like I said, Pittsburgh sent a second-round pick. They have high hopes for DK Metcalf. They extend him, give him a 4-year, $132 million contract. Third in annual value, only behind Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. So he's ahead of A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and others, everybody else. I mean, Jamar Chase, obviously, T. Higgins. Is he better than those players? I don't think there's much of an argument to say that he is. He was 23rd in yards last year. He had 992. And that's what a quarterback in Geno Smith, who alleviated a lot of offensive line problems in Seattle. Who's going to be the quarterback in Pittsburgh? I'm not really sure. You know, it was said that he wanted to go somewhere where the quarterback situation was more stable. It's not Pittsburgh. Obviously not Pittsburgh. But 992 yards, 66 reception, and 5 touchdowns. That's basically his career average. He had a little bit more in his rookie year, and everybody had high expectations with him whenever he came out of the draft with A.J. Brown out of Ole Miss. And he's just kind of been there. He had a plus 16.1 receiving EPA last year. Nothing really special. Paying him that amount of money, a lot. I don't know. For his size and his ability, I think as an athlete, he doesn't produce as well as he could. But also on the other side of this, to me, he's kind of the same receiver as George Pickens. Does this indicate going forward that George Pickens, I believe, is going to be in the last year of his contract next year? Are they leaning towards moving on from George Pickens going forward and DK being their wide receiver one? I don't see them keeping both of them long term. So this may indicate what's going on in the future in Pittsburgh. Moving on. Another AFC division rival. Baltimore Ravens at 17th. They haven't done much of anything. I mean, they lost Brandon Stevens, and I've already shared my thoughts on him. The key things that they've done is they could have lost Ronnie Stanley. He takes what is expected to be a pay cut at 3 years, $60 million, to stay in Baltimore and shore up that left side for Lamar. He could have gone elsewhere and probably made a little more money. There were reports that he could have made more in New England, I believe, a few million more a year, but he's had the health issues. Maybe he likes his regime that he has in Baltimore. 14th on average money. They keep him there. He's finally been healthy as of late, so that's good for the Ravens. The only other move they made of note is adding DeAndre Hopkins. They are still in search of that big body wide receiver one. DeAndre Hopkins probably is not it. I'm curious to see how they're going to use him in the slot going forward. If he can stay on the field, I mean, Baltimore seems to be the place where wide receivers go to end their career. Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins now, Steve Smith. I'm sure I'm missing more, but it just continues to be the theme in Baltimore. Last year, he had 56 receptions for 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. Not a great year, but I mean, we'll see what he can do. It's another weapon, especially like I said in the slot to open up what Zay can do on the outside. Zay Flowers, that is. Another big target. Bring him in. Doesn't drop the ball. Sure, that's about all I have to say. 16, Atlanta Falcons. So with the Atlanta Falcons, they cut Grady Jarrett, who we haven't mentioned yet. Saved $16 million for him. That was kind of a surprising move. He's still a solid player for sure on a defense that was not great to begin with. So they move on from him. Like I said, saved $16 million. What they're doing with that $16 million, not much as of yet. Outside of that, a few moves. They re-signed Mike Hughes, cornerback, 3-year, $18 million contract. They extend Jake Matthews, pictured here on the right, 2-year, $45 million. He's better as a pass blocker than run blocker. I mean, they still have Michael Penix on that rookie contract, but the problem with this team is the Kirk Cousins contract. He's currently a $40 million backup. He's going to be moved. There's no way. I believe I tweeted out a week or so ago that the highest paid backup dating back over the last 10 years was Jimmy Garoppolo. That was the Trey Smith year, and he was like a $12 million backup. So $40 million, $12 million, huge gap. No way Kirk Cousins stays the backup. Where's he going to go? Not really sure. Pittsburgh, Cleveland. I don't know. Players that they've added. Divine Diablo, if you're a Madden player, he's the best, one of the best user linebackers in the game because of his speed. They signed him to a 2-year, $14 million contract. Like I said, the speed is his key attribute. Maybe they're trying to get something more out of him, which I believe that they will, than what they could with the athletic Troy Anderson that they drafted a few years ago, who has not panned out. It was kind of a flyer pick anyways. Then they signed the recently released Leonard Floyd, 1-year contract, $10 million. He had 8.5 sacks last year, 13.6% quarterback pressure rate, and 48 quarterback pressures. So solid addition to this defensive line who definitely needed some help. That's all for Atlanta. Moving on to the top 15. We're in the top half of the league now, and we have Washington Commanders. Have they made so many? God, they've made so many moves. So let's just start with who they lost. They lost Alameda Zaccheaus, who had a career year, 45 receptions, 500 yards, 3 touchdowns. A lot of players had a career year in this offense with Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels. They lost Dante Fowler, who had a breakout year, a career year. On the defensive side of the ball, 11 sacks. Is that true to what he's going to be? 31 years old. He's a pure pass rusher. He was 8th in pass rush win rate. A terrific year. Still not signed by anyone. They also lose the almighty St. Juste, who is probably equivalent to Brandon Stevens in the cornerback market. So didn't lose anything there. They cut Jonathan Allen. They were talking about trading him. I guess they're impressed with what they got out of the rookie Johnny Newton in Illinois in the defensive interior. They saved $16 million. Jonathan Allen was kind of on the decline. Is it a true decline? Not really sure, to be determined. But who they add? They bring back Zach Ertz on a 1-year, $6 million contract. Dependable target for Jaden Daniels. Cheap for him, too. They bring back a leader on that defensive side of the ball, Bobby Wagner. Top 3 linebacker last year. I believe he's 34-ish years old. So definitely one of the older linebackers in the league. He is still a dependable tackler for sure. Uses his brain a lot on the field. He's still amazing in coverage for his age, honestly. I mean, 34 years old. I think he's 34. They bring him back for maybe one more year, 1-year, $9 million contract. So definitely value there. They also signed Javon Kinlaw, 3-year, $45 million contract, 17th in average money for defensive tackles. He had 40 tackles last year, 38th in pressures, 23rd in sacks amongst defensive tackles, 15th in D-tackle pass rush win rate. It's always hard to say that. So value there on the interior for sure. After letting Jonathan Allen go, they get Laramie Tunsil, like I talked about earlier. He's 5th highest for 2025. They're still I believe they're just trying to capitalize. Their offensive line wasn't the best for sure. They trying to capitalize on that rookie contract of Jaden Daniels, hopefully less penalties from Laramie Tunsil. And then they also get Deebo Samuel, which is an interesting addition for them, being that they sent a fifth round pick to San Francisco. His time there was done. I believe he's around 15, 16 million owed this year. He's 14th on average money. Last year he had 51 receptions, almost 700 yards, 3 touchdowns. A down year for him, obviously, but his time in San Francisco has come to an end. Move him on, surprisingly 6.4 air yards per target, 42 rushes for 136 yards. That's where running back Miles comes in. But that 6.4 air yards per target, it is 100% going down in Washington. We saw them run so many bubble screens, so many screens in general. In Washington, it's going to be screen city for him. He's definitely going to get the ball behind the line of scrimmage, probably on over 50% of his catches. Definitely working the underneath, no doubt. See what he can do after the catch. So going to be intriguing to see what they can do in this offense. But they've added a lot of players for sure while only losing just a few. So that's why they're 15th on these rankings. 14th. Arizona Cardinals. Whew. They improved last year under Jonathan Gannon. They have one of my top 3 signings of the offseason. Pictured here. Josh Sweat. Biggest one, or maybe not the biggest, top 3 for sure. They get him on a 4-year, $76 million contract. I believe it's the highest by any of the edge players. Milton Williams also obviously got the higher contract. But they get him for 4 years, $76 million, which is 15th on average money. Just 28 years old, 40 sacks over the last 5 years. He's not in there for the run game. He's in there for the pass rush. And he's averaged 2.48 pressures per game over last 2 years, I believe. And what's intriguing about him is that some of his best time on the field was under Jonathan Gannon, which was 2 years ago. Jonathan Gannon is where he's headed to in Arizona. So they have him, key reuniting between him and Gannon. They also are continuing to shore up that D-line, which was one of their main weaknesses on this team. They signed Baron Browning, who comes over from Denver, 2-year, $15 million. And then today they shore up that interior with Dalvin Tomlinson, who ended up in Cleveland and declined once he got there, but he has potential to be a run stopper for sure, a space eater in that interior defensive line. Not a lot going on in Arizona, but definitely net positives for them. 13th, Indianapolis Colts. They definitely made some intriguing signings. So they lose E.J. Speed, who had fallen off from where he was 2 years ago. They lose Mo Alley Cox, just a big red zone threat. And that's it. That's all they've lost. But they add some interesting players for sure. They add Cam Bynum, safety from Minnesota, 4-year, $60 million contract, 10th on average. Last year, he had 3 interceptions in that great defense under Brian Flores, a 63 passer rating, so solid, to say the least, in coverage. They pair him with a 3-year, $54 million contract in Travarius Ward, who last year, I am not worried about what he did last year. If you're not familiar with his story, last year his infant daughter passed away, and he spoke on this at length about how every time he played in San Francisco, that was always on his mind. He couldn't really commit his mind to the game for all the home games because of that, because he associated bad memories with that. So he's out of there. I believe he could bounce back to where he was 2 years ago, which was an outstanding top 15 cornerback in the NFL, 13th on average value, and that secondary is greatly improved for sure to have those two back there. So they spend their money there, but pictured at the bottom is New York Giants prior quarterback in Daniel Jones. They signed him to a $14 million contract, 1-year contract. And basically what they're saying is, Anthony Richardson, this is your chance. You have to beat this guy out in the offseason to get the starting job. I feel like Daniel Jones is basically like that barometer of Anthony Richardson. If you can't beat him, your time, especially maybe not in the NFL, but especially here in Indianapolis, is over. Because if you can't beat Daniel Jones out coming off the shoulder injury last year, then what good are you here in this offense? It's time for us to move on from you. So a good bar setter in Indianapolis. Going to be curious to see how that plays out, especially with Shane Steichen. He was the one who had that run game in Philadelphia going well 2 years ago. I mean, Daniel Jones does have some wheels on him, so I'm curious to see what happens there. Top 12, Kansas City Chiefs. Made it to the Super Bowl, tried to go for the three-peat, couldn't do it, and now here we are. They are still having a solid offseason, especially considering all the money that they had tied up in some of those players. Travis Kelce's coming back, a few others, but they lose in the offseason. Traded away Joe Thuney, who we have not talked about yet because the team he goes to is high up on this list. Joe Thuney, 32 years old. He's in the last year of his contract. Talk about him more in a little bit. So they lose him. They lose Juju Smith-Schuster, who was not a real big threat. They had so many wide receivers. I mean, they had so many injuries last year. They just had to continue bringing in wide receivers. He had 18 receptions, 200-plus yards, 2 touchdowns. Nothing great. They lose Charles Omenihu, who was solid at times on that defensive line. Chris Jones is the focal point, obviously. Justin Reed is a key contributor that they lost in that secondary, though. Who did they keep? They tagged Trey Smith. Kind of a surprise, being that they had to pay him such high dollar, $23 million. So he is the highest paid player at his position, but is he also the key to their offensive line? Maybe so. One could argue that. So they keep him. They also bring in Jalen Moore from San Francisco, 2-year, $30 million. I mean, he was the backup left tackle there, so I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. A little bit of money for that. They also bring in Hollywood Brown. Bring back Hollywood Brown on a 1-year, $7 million contract. To me, he's just another option for Mahomes. Adds depth to this wide receiver room. They plan to get Rashee Rice back if he's not suspended. What's going to happen? I don't think anything's going to happen with Xavier Worthy. So, again, this wide receiver room could be good. Travis Kelce's coming back. But also pictured here is Nick Bolton. Bring him back on a 3-year, $45 million contract. He was their linebacker last year. 5th in average value, so on the higher end. But he's one of the leaders on this defense. He's questionable in coverage, but he plays with effort. So I guess they just wanted to have him there. I mean, like I said, key contributor on that defense. Only other 2 players they bring in is Christian Fulton, cornerback from the Chargers last year, 2-year, $20 million. And then they also bring in Elijah Mitchell on a 1-year, $4 million contract. He's another injury-prone running back, so I'm kind of curious to see how this all plays out between him and Pacheco. Samaje Perine walks in free agency. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out. He had a good rookie season a few years ago, but nothing since. Kind of, sort of, just because he's been injured. But overall, he had 120 carries, 560 yards. That's 4.7 yards per carry, which is good if he's healthy, but health is a part of the game as well. So like I said, they're 12th. Moving on, getting close to the top 10. 11th. So if you think about who we have left here, we have the likes of New England, Denver, Chicago, Las Vegas, Cincinnati, Seattle, Buffalo. I mean, this is a Buffalo Bills network that I'm working with due champions, and there's no homerism, but they are in the top 10 for sure. All right, anyways, Tampa Bay, NFC South, that is up and coming, I guess you'd say. They don't really lose any players of note, which is why they are still ranked, why they're ranked this high. They re-signed Levante David, who I believe is 34, going into 2025. So on the older side of these linebackers. But when you have a good linebacker who can control the defense and keep everybody where they're supposed to be, you got to hold on to them. Bobby Wagner, Demario Davis, Levante David, all these older linebackers. 1 year, $9 million contract. He's solid versus the run. Like I said, a team leader. This is probably his last year. Bring him back. Two players pictured here. On the right side, you have Chris Godwin, who I thought was going to walk in free agency. I honestly didn't think Tampa Bay was going to bring him back, especially they still have Mike Evans, who gets yet another 1,000-yard season. And then the emergence of Jalen McMillan, the rookie last year in the second half, once Chris Godwin was injured, who had that ankle/foot injury. I believe that was on Monday Night Football versus the Ravens in there in garbage time. They bring him back on a 3-year, $66 million contract. So that was about what was expected, what he'd make on the open market. If he's healthy and paired with McMillan and Mike Evans, I mean, this offense with Baker, the resurging Baker Mayfield, who Cleveland let go, it's going to be interesting to see what this offense could do. And then you add in Bucky Irving, who was great in his rookie year. But prior to Chris Godwin being injured, he led the league in first downs, 50 receptions on 576 yards per game. He's top 10 in yards per game last year, 5 touchdowns. Again, great. His health is the only concern. See when and how he's going to come back from that foot/ankle injury. Also pictured on the left side is Hassan Reddick. I have so many players that end up coming from Philadelphia on that defensive line. He was not in Philadelphia last year. He ended up being traded to the Jets. He had a tumultuous offseason holdout. We'll see what happens with him. 1 year, $14 million contract, grade value 29th in average value, 31 years old. He had 10-plus sacks in 2021 through 2023. Not really worried about what he did last year because of everything that was going on. 2.26 hurries per game in 2023. So which player are you going to get? Definitely worth the shot. You pair him with Vita Vea on that defensive line, and 2 players to be reckoned with if he's at top talent. So a good get, in my opinion, for the Tampa Bay Bucks, especially against 3 divisional quarterbacks who struggle under pressure. Bryce Young, Michael Penix. We'll see what he's going to do in year 2. And then Derek Carr, who is god-awful under pressure. He gets under pressure, the ball's going into the stands. Top 10, finally made it. If you agree, disagree, please let me know. But number 10, Los Angeles Rams. They were having a quite dramatic start to the offseason with the Matthew Stafford saga. They only lose DeMarcus Robinson out of all this. They end up extending Matthew Stafford. We don't have the numbers on that contract yet, but they do end up keeping him, which is key because I don't believe they're far away from their Super Bowl window. They still have this young defensive line that is well ahead of schedule. They have a great receiver in Puka Nacua. They're going to be losing Cooper Kupp, but they still make up for losing Cooper Kupp for sure, because Cooper Kupp's definitely on the decline with his age and being injury prone. And with the Los Angeles Rams, like I said, Matthew Stafford, they re-signed Alaric Jackson, their young offensive lineman, 3-year, $56 million, up-and-coming lineman for sure. They trade away Jonah Jackson. We'll talk about him more in a moment. But there are 2 other key additions. Poona Ford. If you don't know who he is, he, for just did not see the field much. I don't know why he wasn't playing much, but he signed him to a 3-year, $28 million contract. He is a run stopper, especially add him into that front four that they already have with Byron Young, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Kobe Turner. Man, this front four is going to be ridiculous. 29th in average value. He had a solid to above average season in 2024. 3 sacks, 39 tackles, 19 quarterback pressures. Just adds to that front four for sure. But the main one that they added is Devontae Adams. And I had top three signings: Khalil Mack, Josh Sweat, and Devontae Adams. 2-year, $44 million. I mean, you go from Cooper Kupp to that wide receiver one. Not saying he's better than Puka Nacua. He could be, but he is going to take so much pressure off of Puka Nacua in this offense. He gives them another player that they haven't had over the last few seasons as a wide receiver one, that big go-to possession receiver, can also run after the catch. He is 32 years old. 18th in average value with this 2-year, $44 million contract. Totally fine with that money. Because last year he played for Las Vegas, goes to New York. And even with those Las Vegas horrible quarterbacks, he had 85 reception, over 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 14 games, not even 17-game season, which is a down year for him compared to the rest of his years. But he only played 14 games and had a horrible quarterback for some of those games. He was 15th in yards and receiving yards. You put him with Matthew Stafford and then take pressure off of Puka Nacua, pick your poison on this offense. Add in the fact they have Kyron Williams. Going to be interesting. They were only a touchdown away when they were in the red zone in the snow versus the eventual Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Curious to see what happens. Number 9, Seattle. A lot probably do not agree with this. And I can see your argument, but they have made moves. I feel like they have done things that others would not. They traded away DK Metcalf, which we spoke on earlier. You look at that. My argument for trading him away is he is not a wide receiver one, and he is not worth 4 years, $132 million. He is not taking that next step to be a top 5, top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. So go ahead and part with him while his value is still what it is. You got a second rounder in return. Sure, work with it. Their obvious area of need is offensive line. They cut Tyler Lockett, whose time has come to an end. He's been there for 10 years-ish. In Seattle, he was like number 2 in reception, receiving yards, and touchdowns in franchise history. They saved $17 million by cutting him. He just had 49 receptions, 600 yards, 2 touchdowns. They do have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has stepped up into that wide receiver one role. So that's another reason they could part with DK Metcalf. They also cut Draymond Jones, which is a little more surprising. They saved $12 million. He had 4 sacks and 38 quarterback pressures last year. But who they added, if you didn't know, Sam Darnold is the focal point here. It's going to be curious to see how this plays out with him because of the offensive line issues. Geno Smith mitigated a lot of the issues that they had with that offensive line. Yeah, he had turnovers, but he worked so well under pressure compared to what other quarterbacks do. It made you not realize how bad the offensive line was. That's the only negative that I have with what Seattle is doing. They're accumulating draft picks, but the thing is, what are they going to do with those draft picks? I'm assuming they're going to be doing something with this offensive line because it definitely needs to improve. But anyways, they bring in Sam Darnold. It's a quote-unquote 3-year, $100 million contract, but it's truly 2 years with much less guaranteed money. So I'm fine with that. You get 2 years of Sam Darnold. Can he replicate what he did last year? As we know, he kind of crumbled in the playoffs due to that pressure starting to get to him in the backfield. We'll see what happens. That's 19th in average value. So I'll take it. He could be easily a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. So we will see what happens. They also add Marcus Valdez-Scantling, who I said I wish the Saints would have re-added. He can take the top off. So you got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is a more underneath, middle of the field, can take off with it once he catches it. But then they have Marquez Valdez-Scantling on the outside. They also added today DeMarcus Lawrence, not even pictured here. I still believe he still has something left. They may have overpaid for him, but we'll see. They do re-sign 2 key players, in my opinion, and Jaron Reed to a 3-year, $22 million contract, 45 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 40 quarterback pressures, so solid stats for sure. Ernest Jones, 3 years, $29 million, who, I wonder at times, do the Rams regret letting him go? They were trying to get ahead of the curve, I believe, and not wanting to pay him, and thought that they could do better with the ones that they had in-house. Didn't really play out that way. So anyways, he goes to Tennessee. He goes from Tennessee to Seattle, so 3 different teams last year overall. 3-year, $29 million. He goes to Seattle, where Mike McDonald, if you look back as his time as a defense coordinator in Baltimore, he loves, if he finds a linebacker that he likes, I believe that's why he got rid of Jerome Baker, brought Jerome Baker in. He gets traded for Ernest Jones to Tennessee. Didn't fit the Mike McDonald ideal linebacker. I believe he's found his linebacker in Ernest Jones. It started off rough, but that last quarter of the season was great for Ernest Jones. So, Seattle Seahawks. Again, you could argue to me that they were ranked 20th in the offseason, not top 10. I fully understand where you're coming from with that argument. Number 9, Cincinnati Bengals. Boy, whew. The only reason they're here is, again, this is net off-season moves. They have not lost much at all. They lost Mike Hilton, cornerback. They cut Sheldon Rankins. He was ranked 72nd amongst in PFF rating. They saved $10 million by letting him go. Wasn't like the defense is good anyways. They still currently have Trey Hendrickson. Gonna see what happens with that. So as of today, they're ranked number 8. They get rid of Trey Hendrickson. Depends on what the return is. They could drop 10 spots on this list, honestly. The Trey Hendrickson thing is quite questionable to me, to say the least. I tweeted this the other day. Their defense is already god-awful. They don't want to pay all their players. I mean, I guess they have to pick and choose, but they're going full offense, honestly. They plan to win every game 45-42 next year. No idea. Anyways, he's still there for the time being. They surprisingly, in my opinion, extend Mike Gesicki 3-year, $26 million contract, which is 15th. I guess maybe Joe Burrow wanted that. Not really sure. Tag T. Higgins. So a net positive in keeping him there rather than letting him walk in free agency. Man, you've probably seen this, but they are always late on paying their players. They've waited on paying T. Higgins, so that's a few more $1 million than what they could have paid a few years ago, a few more million per year. Jamar Chase, they could have paid 2 years ago. Trey Hendrickson, they could have paid 2 years ago. They haven't. So now they just end up paying more to keep these players. So anyways, T. Higgins tagged $26 million. Last year, he did have some injuries, only played 12 games, but he still accumulated 73 receptions, 900 yards, 10 touchdowns. 3 touchdowns coming in one game, I believe. Last year was, with advanced analytics, his second best season. He was 12th in catch rate over expected at plus positive 7.2%. So he's catching balls he really shouldn't, per se. That's 12th in the league and 9th in reception EPA. So he's a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL per advanced analytics. But you just got to get him under contract. Quit playing around. If you're going to keep him, keep him. But as of right prior to getting on here, I have seen the speculation that he could go to Carolina. He follows like 4 or 5 Carolina Panthers accounts. And he also, JC Horn tweeted or posted on Instagram a picture saying something about let's link up with 5 T. Higgins number. Going to be curious to see how that plays out. I mean, that would be great for Carolina. who still has the cap room to extend him for sure, to give him a new contract. They also re-signed Samaje Perine, trying to bring back the old magic of a few years ago, 2-year, $4 million contract. BJ Hill is also re-signed, 3-year, $33 million, 17 sacks over the last 4 years, 50-plus tackles last year, 30th in grading amongst defensive interior players, 33rd in pressures. He's just very consistent. He's had around a 70 PFF grade over the last 4 years. I think they kind of know what they're getting with him. 3 years, $33 million. I'm fine with that. Moving on, the aforementioned Carolina Panthers. So, like I said, number 7. This is mostly due to the fact that they really didn't lose any talent. They lost Dane Jackson, or they cut Dane Jackson, saved $4 million. Shaq Thompson no longer there. They cut Miles Sanders. I believe they saved $6 million on him. Once he left Philadelphia, he's been god-awful in Carolina. Nothing great at all. So they make quite a few moves. They re-sign Andy Dalton to a 2-year, $8 million contract, which I'm totally fine with because he is a quality backup. You saw when that first game that he came in, I believe, again, whenever they benched Bryce Young last year, he was great against the Raiders, put up 300-plus yards. He does have that higher ceiling than a lot of backup quarterbacks, so I'm fine with 2 years, $8 million. They also bring in Rico Dowdle, which is one of the later signings, on a very cheap contract. I believe it was less, $6-8 million, something like that. He had the 4th highest percentage of runs getting 3+ yards after contact. I'm surprised the Cowboys, not really surprised that they did not make the smart move and retain him in Dallas. Let him walk, whatever. So that's going to be an outstanding 1-2 punch between he and Chuba Hubbard, who has become a top 10 running back in the league behind that offensive line that they invested a lot of money in and kept intact going into 2025. They also bring in Bobby Brown III, defensive tackle, 3-year, $21 million contract. Solid player, nothing spectacular, but he is solid. They also bring in Treshaun Wharton from Kansas City, 3-year, $45 million. So they are just spending money on the defensive line, or defensive side of the ball, which I'm totally fine with because they ranked, I think, dead last in like 7 different categories with their defense. Spend the money if you got it. Got to do something to improve this team, to give Bryce Young a chance anyways to not be just having to outscore everyone. Then they also bring in Teron Moehrig from Las Vegas, 3-year, $51 million, maybe a little overpay. The 6th in average value, but he had his best season yet, so I believe they're betting on the future with him. 13th in tackles last year with 104, 2 interceptions, so he can play the ball. Main thing they did is extend J.C. Horn, made him the highest paid cornerback ever. He had ups and downs. Is he currently worth the highest paid cornerback in the NFL? Absolutely not. I think their argument to give him a 4-year, $100 million contract is you have all this cap space. You kind of have to do something with it. So you might as well keep your best player. If you're not able to do anything else, keep your best player, keep him happy, hope for the future that he does get better. So not really sure, but that's the best argument I could make. So they have added a lot, and that's why they are ranked number 7 in offseason moves so far. I guess you could argue against them, but to me, number 7. All right, up to the top 6 now in offseason moves. Las Vegas Raiders. So, to start off, they cut Gardner Minshew, save a few $1 million. They needed to get rid of him anyways. Once they realized that it was either AOC or whoever they were going to draft, they didn't need Gardner Minshew clogging up the quarterback room. He was not going to be playing any in 2025, in my opinion. So they do that. That's the only person they really lose. Trevon Moehrig, maybe, that went to Carolina. But they extend Max Crosby, make him, prior to Myles Garrett, the highest paid defensive end in the NFL. They give him a 3-year, $106 million contract. With that, I mean, is he worth it? Yeah, probably. He was injured last year, and even with that injury, since he's been drafted in 2019, he's 5th in sacks in the NFL, around 59.5 in those 5 years. So solid numbers for sure. One of the few players who could be Defensive Player of the Year candidate every year. They re-signed Malcolm Kuntz. He didn't play in 2024. Let's start with that because he had the knee injury. They get him on a 1-year, $12 million contract, which is 34th in average value. But you look at the upside with him, the possibility of what he can be, especially with his defense paired opposite of Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins, who's on that interior line. The possible positives for him outweigh the negatives for him for sure. Because you look at the end of his 2023 year, over those last 4 weeks, he had 6 sacks, 19 pressures in the last 4 games. So if he can continue where he was at the last quarter of the season, I mean, a great signing for $12 million. They add Jeremy Chin to the back end to basically replace Trevon Merrick. 2-year, $16 million, 10th in tackles. They also lose Nate Hobbs, but I mean, it's not really a big loss in my opinion. He was 10th in tackles among DBs with 107. He basically had a resurgent year under Dan Quinn last year. So a good addition. The main one to me, besides Max Crosby, Geno Smith. Surprising move, I guess, per se, with the Las Vegas Raiders. Reports say that he was wanting around $40 million in Seattle. I think Seattle was closer to 35 per year. They still say that they're going to extend him. He's going to get that extension in Las Vegas. I think they're waiting maybe for the new league year, which was yesterday, March 12th. Curious to see what his contract ends up being. But I mean, it's a good move. It's definitely a net positive for sure. Whenever they had Aiden O'Connell last year, the statistics may show that they are near similar if you're just looking at box scores, but that's not the case. If you watch film and look at what Geno Smith does to alleviate pressure in Seattle, he is probably a top 10 quarterback. Even though he's older, he's definitely had a resurgence over the last few years. They just traded a 3rd-round contract for him. And for it to be a not great quarterback draft, there's not really anyone else out there in free agency this year. They didn't want to pay Sam Darnold, so they go get their quarterback. He reunites with Pete Carroll. And, I mean, the stock for Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers just goes through the roof, honestly, in my opinion. So curious to see what the contract ends up being. I mean, this AFC West, the Chargers better do a lot because you have the Chiefs who are going to be good no matter what. The Broncos, who have definitely taken a leap. They haven't even been mentioned, so they're top 5 in my opinions. And in my opinion, they're going to be a top 5 team. So Las Vegas being number 6, they definitely have taken that next step and will be definitely probably competing to be a 500 or so team going into 2025. Entering the top 5, Denver Broncos. So the Denver Broncos have made a ton of additions. They haven't really lost anyone. Bo Nix came in and was a pleasant surprise, even though he doesn't have a high average, high ADOT. Average depth of target is relatively low, but Sean Payton knows what to do with his quarterbacks. And with that said, they re-signed. Let me just put all the additions on here. Re-signed DJ Jones. Sure up the interior of that defensive line. Defense that was also a top 3 defense last year. 3-year, $39 million contract. 2nd in second in it. Can't even say the words right now. He was 58th overall in PFF, which is low in my regard, but he was had 33 solo tackles, which is 15th. That was a solid re-signing, and that was probably the worst of their moves. The great ones that they made is after Evan Ingram was cut in Jacksonville, they went out and got him on a 2-year, $18 million contract. The reason that's so great is Sean Payton loves his tight ends, as we know. Remember what he did in New Orleans when he was there. Bo Nix needs more weapons in this offense. They get him at 2 years, $18 million. The upside is there for sure, But you compare that 2-year, $18 million to Juwan Johnson getting 3 at 31. So that's a $10.3 million per year with Juwan Johnson, $9 million per year with Evan Ingram. They're in different ballparks as far as their talent level. So they get him. They also add Talanoa Hufanga, sorry, who had a great year in 2023, was injured at times. Definitely could be a bounce back, especially in this defense that has been great the last season for sure. But he gets a 3-year, $45 million contract. He's 10th in average value. Definitely could be a top 10 safety for the NFL in 2025. Dre Greenlaw, 3 years, $35 million. Injured. You remember him getting injured 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, tears his Achilles going into the second half of that game. 9th in average value. When he's healthy, he could easily be a top 10 linebacker in the NFL. So you put all that together, this team didn't really lose anything, made the defense even better, added a weapon for Bo Nix, and that's why they're top 5. Top 4. Almost there. New England Patriots. So New England Patriots, one of the worst teams in the NFL last year, traded the D tackle to New Orleans. That's all they really lost on this team. So straight to the additions. They add Robert Spillane, linebacker from Las Vegas. Solid linebacker. They have so many holes that no matter what they did in free agency, they weren't going to fill all the holes. But they tried their best. 3-year, $33 million for Robert Spillane. Top 5, 6 linebacker versus the run. He's amazing against the run, especially in 2024. Coverage, not so much, but you take what you can get in New England, especially over the last 2 seasons they've had. They signed Mac Hollins from Buffalo, 2-year, $8 million contract. I mean, they still need more weaponry in the wide receiver room. Last year, he had 31 receptions, 378 yards, 5 touchdowns. So kind of a bigger target for him, for Drake May. They add to the offensive line, which was one of their weakest spots, with Morgan Moses, 3-year, $24 million contract. I'm okay with that. They add a cornerback, again, to pair with Christian Gonzalez, one of the few bright spots on this team. So now they have a 1-2 combo that's relatively good in New England with that cornerback room. They get him 3-year, $54 million, 13th in average value. He's consistent on what you're going to get with him. He was 25th in coverage EPA, so definitely one of the top cornerbacks for him to be CB2 in this defense. Great for them. They signed Harold Landry, who Tennessee cut. So they end up getting Harold Landry, who played under Mike Vrabel whenever Mike Vrabel was in Tennessee. 3-year, $44 million contract. I mean, he gets pressures. He gets sacks. I mean, does he clean up more than getting actual pressure? He played with Jeffrey Simmons in Tennessee, so we'll see what happens there. But he's had 32 sacks over the last 3 seasons, 9+ each year, and 52 sacks in 6 years. So the talent is there. And you're pairing him with someone else who is to be determined to see how good he really is. I'm curious to see if it was Philadelphia that potentiated him, or did he help potentiate Philadelphia's front 4 and Milton Williams, the most lucrative contract of the offseason, I believe, especially on the defensive side. And 4 years, $104 million, 7th highest defensive line player per PFF grade. So, I mean, a good year for sure. Pass rusher, not a run stopper. And again, I'm just curious to see how much was that due to him playing in Philadelphia. Keep it short, keep it sweet. They added a lot of players. They added a lot of talent to this team who did not have a lot of talent. Top 3. Chicago Bears. Whew, almost to number 1. So, the only players they cut, they only lose a few players. Only 2 of note, but they've added so much talent that's why they're number 3. They cut Gerald Everett, irrelevant to this offense, saved $6 million. They lose Tevin Jenkins, one of the top offensive linemen in free agency. They lose Keenan Allen, who's on the downturn of his career. He did have 70 receptions, 700 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. So he was a top 40-ish, top 50th 50-ish wide receiver last year. They lose him, but they do have some additions for sure. They add Dio Odeyingbo. I always have trouble saying that name. 3-year, $48 million contract. You're kind of betting on the upside that he's younger and is going to start to his stock go up as he continues to play. 22nd in average value, just 3 sacks last year. But like I said, he has room to grow. He's had 17 sacks in 4 years. The weird thing about him is he's 83rd in sack percentage. So he's not getting a lot of sacks, but he's 23rd in pressure percentage. So he's getting to the quarterback, but he's not sacking them. I don't know. You be the judge of what you think about that. They pick up what Atlanta drops in Grady Jarrett, sign him to a 3-year, $44 million contract. Still got something left in the tank, I'm sure. 2.5 sacks last year, 32 quarterback pressures. They add Drew Dahlman. When you can get a top 10, top 15 center in the league, you take him. 3-year, $42 million. Second highest center value, so they're kind of maybe overpaying, but is he a top 5 center? Potentially. And that's why, to me, the Bears are one of the top 3 teams as far as what they've done in this offseason. They get Ben Johnson, and he comes in and he says, you know what, we're going to protect Caleb Williams in this offense. If we're going to see what he can do if he's protected. We know he had a horrible offensive line last year. So they go out, they sign Drew Dahlman as the new center. They trade for Jonah Jackson, who was not getting playing time in Los Angeles, but was a great player in 2023. Took a step back in 2024, so they're betting on the positives that they could get out of him. Going to be better than probably what they had overall from offensive line perspective. 11th in average value. They send a 6th-round pick to the Rams, not really giving up much besides cap space. They also trade for Joe Thuney from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's in the last year of his contract. They sent a 4th-round 2026 pick. 13th in average value, so it's going to be determined to see what happens in 2025 as see if they give him a new contract or not. Seventh best guard amongst most metrics. So like I said, they revamped this offensive line. They turned this team into something new. I'm going to be curious to see what Caleb Williams could do. Still probably need another weapon for him. So we will see what they do. They have a lot of options now, being that they shored up this offensive line with the 10th overall pick, 9th, 10th, somewhere around there. What they can do with that pick. Number 2, Minnesota Vikings. So that kind of makes you realize who is number 1. Yes, they lose Sam Darnold. You could argue either way how you feel on that with them losing him. But they also lose Cam Robinson, who they traded for midseason, and Cam Akers, who's definitely a solid backup running back in that system. They still could bring him back. They've already had him, 3 times now? But the additions, they bring back Byron Murphy on a 3-year, $54 million contract, 13th in average value, who had a great season in 2024, a step up from where he was at in 2023, 2022 for sure. They're betting more on his future. Like I said, best year yet. Aaron Jones, they bring him back. I was kind of worried about him. I tweeted this out the other day, worried about what he could do without the interior of this offensive line being improved. That's the 6th highest contract they paid him, 2 for 20. He had over 1,100 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, and then they went out and improved this interior offensive line. They add Ryan Kelly, center from Indianapolis. They add Will Freeze, guard from Indianapolis. They signed him to some hefty contracts, but they are doing everything that they can to give J.J. McCarthy, who seems to be the quarterback of 2025, the best chance going forward. They also add Isaiah Rodgers from the Philadelphia Eagles on a 2-year, $11 million contract. Also add Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. Jonathan Allen contract, 3 years, $51 million. Is he on the downslope? Not really sure. He definitely can add more to a defensive line that is already solid with this defense under Brian Flores. 15th in average value for defensive tackles. Only played 8 games last year. 23 sacks over the last 3 seasons. Like I said, quarterback pressure's down, but overall, a positive ad. So, with that said, I promise I'm not being a homer, but Buffalo is taking the number 1 spot for their offseason. if you don't know, they have made so many moves in the offseason, lost not really that much, and have just went above and beyond with what they could do to this team with the situation that they were in and basically, to me, they have no excuse to not win the Super Bowl, especially with the draft still to come. They have added so much to this team. It's really mind blowing. I did not think that they would be able to make this many moves in the offseason, and day after day, it was constant additions. Only players they've lost of note, Amari Cooper, who didn't really perform compared to what he's done in the last few years, and Von Miller. They cut Von Miller. That it was already kind of expected that they may get out of that contract. They saved $8 million by cutting him. They replace him. Get to that. Picture is full. Graphic is full of all these players that have either been restructured, extended, added to this team. So I'm just going to bounce all around here. They extend Greg Rousseau, defensive end, 4-year, $80 million contract, easily a top 15 edge player in 2024. And to get him at $20 million a year, beyond amazing. They are taking what seems to be that Philadelphia Eagles mindset and trying to get ahead of the curve and being correct on a lot of them, where they extend their players prior to their peak. They catch them before they're really, really great, but while they're good, and assume that they know what they're doing in their draft process. And going forward, they know that they're going to continue to elevate their play year in, year out. Let's move one. Move two. Let's just go straight to Josh Allen. I mean, you see his picture front and center. They extend him 6-year, $330 million contract. Seems large. It's 5th in average. The thing is, I'm not really worried about it, because when you look at what percentage of the cap that he's taken up, it's only 19.7% of the cap in the year that he signed the extension, compared to everyone else. That is 13th. To get Josh Allen at 13th ranking of the cap percentage shows you what Brandon Beane can do as GM of the Buffalo Bills. They showed Josh Allen. He said that, what's a few extra $1 million? I got everything I need in life. I'm here basically to win. And to get him at that number is beyond amazing. I'm not worried about the guaranteed money. No one gets guaranteed money anymore after the Deshaun Watson fiasco. But Josh Allen is more than deserving of that money. Another extension, Terrell Bernard, 4 years, $50 million. Khalil Shakir, 4 years, $53 million, 24th in average value. He is easily the 24th best wide receiver. He is so important to this offense and what he does, never dropping the ball, always being the sure-handed player in the middle of the field for the Buffalo Bills. The offense could not go on without him. Again, Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir, Greg Rousseau, Josh Allen, all 4 of those extended before they necessarily needed to be. So they're trying to get ahead of that curve. Like I said, those alone probably could have made them the top offseason team thus far, just with the extensions. They then re-signed Damar Hamlin. Damar Hamlin, bring him back on a 1-year contract. Also bring in Forrest from the Commanders, basically competing for that starting position. They re-signed Ty Johnson, 2-year, $5 million contract. He is, top 5, top 10 at least, receiving running back in the NFL. Again, another great move to get him back on 2-year, $5 million contract. They then add Larry Ogunjobi. Again, not a great year last year, but to get him in on a 1-year, $8 million contract, I love the depth. They bring in Michael Hoyt from Los Angeles, 3-year, $21 million contract. This guy is kind of all around if you watch him play. Great versus the run last year, 27 quarterback pressures, 3 sacks. You add him to this defensive line. That was maybe one of their weaknesses in Buffalo. They shore that up. They extend Gregory Rousseau. They bring in this guy. They then add Joey Bosa, 1-year, $13 million contract. If he is healthy, sky's the limit. They're kind of taking a flyer on him. He only had 9 starts last year. Again, like I said, health is the biggest issue. 5 sacks, 33 pressures. But if you can get him for the playoffs, maybe they just put him in bubble wrap from week 1 till week 13, 14. Just let everybody else do the heavy lifting. Have him ready for that playoff run. This front four is looking much better already from where they were last year. Sprinkle on a little bit of Josh Palmer as a big receiver for Josh Allen. 3-year, $36 million contract. I'm down with it. Give him another big target to go get the ball. And the Buffalo Bills, you add all this up, all these contracts that they brought in somehow miraculously, and they are by far the number one offseason team in 2025. We still have the draft left, but someone would have to blow me out of the water with the draft for the Minnesota Vikings, who was number 2, Chicago, that was number 3, to overtake what the Bills have done in this offseason. So, to recap, show you everybody here. Not really sure who stands out the most to you or who's the biggest surprise, but this is where I stand as of today, March 13th, on who had the top off seasons. Still got quite some time until the off season is over, but we do have the draft next month. We're a month and a half away from the draft. But in the meantime, we will continue every Thursday. We will get right back into it next week with our power rankings, where I am breaking down each team. I think I've made it through number 27. And each week I'm doing 1 or 2 teams, discussing basically top to bottom, strengths, weaknesses, pros, cons, additions, subtractions, cap situation on each of those teams, and discussing what they need to do forward and what their best and worst outcomes could be for 2025. But at almost 2 hours for this episode, I am done talking. And until next week, appreciate you stopping by watching the show.